Hello and welcome to another Fantasy Premier League video. My name's Steve and today we're taking a look at some strategic dangers to be aware of across game weeks 28 and 29. I've actually come up with three separate tactics that a lot of managers are considering, I think, or by the sounds of things, and there are some caveats that people should probably be aware of. We are also looking at a change in tactics on when to use the free hit for the remainder of the season as well. But before we get into that, I'll just timestamp the video. It is Tuesday the 14th, 3 p.m. in New Zealand, which is about 2 a.m. UK time. I think they might have had daylight savings, but early hours of Tuesday morning, which means that all the games, or the first round of fixtures, have been played in game week 27. We are just waiting on the final results from Brentford, Brighton, Crystal Palace and Southampton. We're currently sitting on 67 points for the game week, which is great to see, especially considering we actually we were hoping to reap the rewards from previous week's plays, where we actually went and played with 10 men in game week 25. The reason we played with 10 is we avoided bringing in too many Liverpool assets, so that we avoided using the wild card in game week 26. And then in game week 26 we did take a hit in order to bring in Tony game week earlier because of the Nketiah injury. Looks like Nketiah is still potentially injured, so I think that play has probably worked out, but we are back in the green arrows. Average of 47, currently on 67 points. McAllister captain still to play, and Tony remaining. I only have two doublers in this team, but we will go through that review at the end of the video. Now, first off, the first strategic play that a lot of managers are looking at this week is Haaland out. And it's not just Haaland out, it's actually the Haaland Hokey, because pretty much all managers that are looking at selling Haaland will definitely be bringing him back, most likely in game week 30 after the double. Haaland blanks this week and then is playing Liverpool at home next week. So he's only got one fixture in the next two game weeks, but then in game week 30 he is playing the likes of Southampton. So most managers have a plan of, Southampton away, bringing Haaland back game week 30 for Southampton away. He then has Leicester at home 31, and then a potential blank in game week 32. So with the Haaland Hokey, I myself am not going to be investing in this play at all for a couple of reasons. The first being getting rid of Haaland and then buying him back is immediately going to cost me about 8 points. So 4 points for the transfer out, 4 points for the transfer back in. And this is only for a 2-week play. So whoever we bring in this week, where the most likely candidates are going to be someone like Watkins or probably João Felix, maybe an Isaac from Newcastle who did alright at the weekend. But any of these players that we do bring in would have to get more than 8 points across these 2 game weeks in order to make this play viable. And there will also be a potential loss in value on Haaland as well. I think most managers will be selling, losing some value in him, and so they will need to leave some money in the bank somewhere in order to buy Haaland back in game week 30. Now, the 8 points alone is probably not that big of a risk. There are players out there that will have 3 games in the next 2 game weeks compared to Haaland's 1, and Haaland's 1 game is against Liverpool, so it is not an easy fixture. And the likes of Watkins, Felix and whatnot could score the 8 points or more. But I think the biggest strategic disadvantage to playing the Hokey with Haaland is to those teams that own Ivan Toney. And I think a lot of managers out there that are considering this Haaland Hokey Cokey switch are all those teams seem to have Ivan Toney in their squads, and this is making the Haaland Hokey Cokey play even more risky. So as of right now, Toney's only played his first game out of the 2 games in his double. He avoided getting a yellow card in that first game, which is awesome to see because we are kind of relying on Toney to get through hopefully until the game week 29 and play both games in the double. But Toney could pick up a yellow card in his final fixture this week, which would put him on 9 yellow cards as of game week 28, where he will be facing Leicester. If he picks up a yellow card in that game week 28 fixture, he would be out for... so he could go yellow in the final game, yellow in game week 28, and then he would be out of the blank, or worse, maybe even worse still, is he doesn't pick up a yellow in the final game of this week. He picks up his yellow in game week 28, which means that he's on 9 yellows going into that double, which will give us even more cause for concern. He could quite easily again pick up that 10th yellow in the first game, missing out the second game of Brentford's double. Brentford's double is also not amazing. It is United away as the second game. So if he does miss one of the 2 fixtures, it will be the more difficult of the 2, which would be Manchester United away. But the first game is not easy either. He is playing Brighton away in the first game on game week 29. But not only does the yellow card situation hanging over Toney's head, he is also looking at being banned by the FA, which we could see coming in. The hearing could be as early as the first week of April, which would be the first fixture in game week 29. So if you are considering doing the Haaland Hokey Cokey, which will take up 2 of your free transfers, and if you have Toney in your team, you are basically setting yourself up for an almost certain hit over the next couple of game weeks to probably deal with Toney when you are also trying to bring Haaland back in. And whether or not that play is going to work out over the next couple of game weeks, I mean, whoever knows, but I mean, Haaland could quite easily go and get a goal or more in the Liverpool fixture, and if he does score in that Liverpool fixture, it's going to be very hard for Haaland Hokey Cokeyers to make that the 8-point difference back, plus whatever Haaland scores in that Liverpool fixture on top of the 8 points, plus that transfer out of Toney, which is almost inevitable. I mean, hey, maybe it doesn't happen. We have had players like Diego Costa in the past who just sat on like 9 yellow cards for ages and just kept scoring goals. Maybe Toney doesn't pick up any of these yellow cards, but he could also just as easily get banned. That hearing could happen and he could be out, which means that people will be taking hits to deal with Toney, probably for either game week 29 double or very soon after. It might even be game week 30 when potentially he's picked up his 10th yellow card, or he has been suspended by the FA, and in which case everyone will need to be selling Toney the same week that they are looking to buy Haaland back. And hey, maybe that'll work out perfect. Maybe you go Haaland out for Watkins, and then in game week 30 you go Toney out for Haaland back in. That would mean though that you will be holding on to Watkins for the remainder, or for a lot longer than what you might have been planning if you were going Watkins out and then Haaland back in for Watkins, if Watkins was the guy you were buying, or Felix, or whoever you were making that Hokey Cokey move on. So for me, that's just too much risk up in the air. I do not rate Liverpool's defence at all. There was a flash in the pan against United, and then straight after that they went and played Bournemouth and lost 1-0. And Haaland could quite easily go and decimate that Liverpool backline. No one would put it past them this season, especially considering the way that Haaland is performing, and also Liverpool do seem to be shipping a lot of goals. So I could quite easily see Haaland scoring. I can quite easily see Toney being suspended for either a 2-match suspension for yellow cards or out for months because of the ban. and I can just see hits coming in to replace these players, which will almost certainly not work out as a total point score that's going to be beneficial for this move. So that's the first strategic danger to be aware of. Of course, if you don't have Tony in your teams, then the Haaland Hokey Cokey play is probably a little bit more viable, and you'll just need to weigh that up on who you're actually bringing in. Now, next on the list, I actually have to preface with a decision over when we use the free hit chip, assuming that you do have the free hit chip remaining. Now, I've said in previous videos that I think you typically gain the maximum benefit out of the free hit chip by playing it in a big double game week as opposed to a big blank game week. And the reasoning behind that is simply because when you free hit in a big double, you can get very close to 11 doublers, or maybe 9 good doublers and a couple of single game week players if you're going for quality over quantity, and that total point score will typically outscore whatever happens if you do the reverse situation where you actually try to use a free hit chip in a big blank game week. So over season after season, typically you will find that free hit chips are best served used in a big double. Now, I did say that there was a rare caveat that comes with that advice, and that caveat is that if you combine the free hit chip with another chip, that the overall strategy across, say, 2 to 3 game weeks could work out to be a bigger total points scored for your team, depending on how you employ that chip. Now, for me, I have dodged using the wildcard. As I said earlier, I didn't go heavy on Liverpool in game week 25. I only brought in Mo Salah and then transferred him out straight the following week. Didn't bring in Trent, didn't bring in Darwin, and that allowed me to save my wildcard for later in the season. Now, due to that, and the way that the doubles have fallen, and how the game week 32 blank is now planning out, the game week 32 blank is actually going to be a much smaller blank in game week 32, and the doubles in 34 and 37 also are going to be much smaller, meaning that there are not as many teams doubling in 34 and 37 as what we were looking at a few weeks ago before the FA Cup results came out. So, for my team and my analysis, I think a game week 33 wildcard looks like the most optimal play now. And the reason for that is you can wildcard in your doublers for 34 and 37. So if you can see on screen here, all the teams that look like they are doubling in both 34 and 37. So previous videos I've said a free hit in 34 or 37 would probably be the way that I was going to go, and the way that the best use of that chip, because those doubles were looking really big. But now the doubles are looking a little bit smaller, and the same teams are doubling in 34 and 37. So Brighton double 34-37, and they've got another double to be announced. Chelsea double 34-37 probably. Fulham double 34-37. Leeds double 34-37. We've got Liverpool City United doubling in 34 and 37. Newcastle still have another double to be arranged somewhere, their catch-up game against Brighton, and West Ham have a double in 34 and 37. So if we were going to use a free hit chip in 34 to maximize all these doubles, we probably want those same players, or a majority of those players in our teams for 37. And if we do free hit them in, obviously we lose those players the following week. And so wildcarding them in game week 33 seems like a more optimal play. So, for those that have been following the channel for a little while, that's a bit of a strategic pivot from what we were looking at earlier, and I thought I would go over that decision first because it leads into Manchester United assets, and specifically around United assets for double game week 29. So as we're all aware, United are blanking this week, game week 28, blanking alongside City, Liverpool, Fulham, Brighton and West Ham. Now, a lot of teams out there are quite heavy on Brighton, Manchester United and Haaland. Some teams will maybe have a Liverpool player or two floating around, but the rest of the blankers is not really too big of a deal. In game week 29, Manchester United have a pretty good double. It's not amazing, but it's pretty good. They have to go away to Newcastle, which is a bit of a tough game. And I believe Joelinton is back. So Joelinton's out this week, but he is back for the United game in 29, which means the Newcastle team will be a little bit stronger. So they've been without Bruno Guimaraes for a red card, 3-game ban, and then as soon as he got back and he played next to Joelinton, Joelinton got his 10th yellow and was then suspended for 2 weeks, and so the full force of Newcastle won't be back until game week 29, which means this fixture against Nottingham Forest away this week does look very good on paper, but they are potentially not as defensively sound. Nottingham Forest have been scoring quite often at home, however, still back Newcastle to keep a clean sheet in 28 for any of those of you who are worried about that. But in 29, Manchester United looks like a team that people are going to want to be loading up on. So we're looking at the likes of Luke Shaw. Most people have Rashford and are holding Rashford through most of these blanks, so that's just a lock in most people's teams. But the other player that a lot of managers are looking at is Bruno Fernandes. I myself am also considering a couple of plays with bringing Bruno Fernandes in as well. However, if we do look to bring Bruno Fernandes in next week for the game week 29 double, it almost certainly locks in the use of the free hit chip in game week 32. So if we have a look at who's likely blanking in 32, we've got Brighton versus Man City, Chelsea versus United, City versus Brighton, United versus Chelsea, and then a less likely blank of Fulham and Leeds blanking against each other in game week 32. So with the results coming out the way that football results normally come out, we will probably see Brighton, Chelsea, United and City all blanking in game week 32. So for teams that are looking to load up on United assets in game week 29, if you are not looking a couple of game weeks forward, you will probably not realize that you're almost certainly locking in your free hit chip for game week 32, which is actually probably the best play, I think. I think we want to be heavy on United because they go, after the blank, they go double, Everton at home, Nottingham Forest away, and then probable blank. So the 3-game run from 29, 30 and 31 are all very good fixtures to hold on to United assets. Of course, United are also without Casemiro. He has just been red carded in the last game and will serve his 3 matches out, and so United will be without Casemiro for a lot of these fixtures. But I still think United will be quite a strong force across these 3 game weeks and should return quite a few points. So if you do not own your free hit chip, if you've already used it earlier in the season and you are considering bringing United assets in, do have a little bit of look at your team in game week 32 to see how you're actually going to manage that, because taking hits to bring in United players now for game week 29 may just involve even more hits in game week 32 in order to deal with United's blank, assuming that they do blank. Now, of course, they may not blank, but United's game in 32 is not amazing. It is at home to Chelsea, which is a bit of a tough fixture. So that's the second strategic consideration that managers should look to make in game weeks 28 and 29. Figure out what you're actually going to do in game week 32, especially if you do not have your free hit chip available. Okay, and then finally, the other team that we should be thinking about very carefully, especially in game week 29, probably not so much this week, is because they blank, is Brighton. Now, many teams are very heavy on Brighton at the moment because they're double in 27 and double again in 29, and they are blanking in 28. But the Brighton run after this double in 29 is actually not amazing. Now, the double is really good, especially for attackers. They play Brentford at home and then Bournemouth away. That's actually also a very good defensive set of fixtures as well. Brentford, okay, maybe will score, but it is at Brighton's home ground. Brighton have been looking like a top 4 to top 6 side. I think they will probably shut out Brentford in this fixture. But they then go Tottenham away, Chelsea away, and either blank in 32, or if they do not blank, they will be playing Man City at home. Now, those 3 game weeks following are terrible. There is a small chance that the Newcastle versus Brighton fixture is pulled into game weeks 30 or 31, but if it is not, it might be pushed out until 33 plus. And so we could be looking at bringing in a Brighton asset for 29 and then have 2 very hard away fixtures back to back following in 30 and 31, and then a blank in 32. So if you are looking at your Brighton assets in 28 as a potential way to fill up to 11 players, it might be more viable to sell one of your Brighton assets in 28 as opposed to doing a Haaland Hokey Cokey in order to play with 11 players if you feel the need to play with 11 players. Now, like I said last week, I'm more of a quality over quantity manager. I completely dodged all the Brentford defenders, and I was a little bit unsure about bringing in a Stupinan as well. Simply because of the blank in 28, the fact that during the international break, Stupinan's actually travelling all over the world, and then 30, 31 and 32 all look pretty bad for Brighton assets. So, my plan, or strategic plan now, is to almost certainly wildcard 33, free hit in 32, which actually means that I'm dead ending my team into game week 31. So whatever transfers I'm looking at making in 28, 29, 30 are only going to be held until game week 31. They will play their 31 fixture, and then I'll be free hitting the lot of them in 32, and then wildcarding most of them out in 33. So when we're actually looking at short-term, we're actually looking at very short-term plays from this point forward. It's only a 4-week turnaround time. We are looking for some pretty aggressive transfers in order to, get back up the ranks. We've had to take a couple of red arrows in a row because in game week 25 we decided to play with 10 men and avoid the Liverpool players in order to hold on to our wild card. Game week 26 we unfortunately had to take a hit because Nketiah got injured, and in 25, and actually game week 25, Nketiah didn't play or didn't start either of the doubles. Thankfully, game week 27 we are back in the green arrows and climbing up ranks. So this is my team. Well, this is what my team looks like as of right now. So we will put Shaw on the bench, Haaland and Rashford. So I will be holding my United assets through this blank in game week 28, putting both Rashford and Shaw on the bench. I am definitely also holding McAllister through this blank. He is absolutely doing bits in that Brighton squad. And so at the moment, I've got 2 free transfers heading into game week 28, but only, was that 9 players playing. One of those 9 players playing is Tarkowski playing Chelsea away, and then next week Tarkowski has Tottenham at home. So I bought Tarkowski in a few weeks ago as a bit of a short-term hold in order to jump on a double and allow me to hold some United players through some blanks. And part of this week's strategy is to follow through with what I was talking about for the last couple of weeks, which was to bring Maddison in because he plays in game week 28. It's an okay fixture for an attacker. It's against Brentford. Unfortunately, it is away, but I do not rate the Brentford defence, and so I'm pretty sure Leicester are going to score. And if Leicester are going to score, you'd almost bank on Maddison to be involved in this. This leaves us 1.4 million in the bank. And the reason we're also putting in Maddison this week is he's got an amazing double in game week 29, which is Crystal Palace away and Aston Villa at home. My other tentative plan, if you've been following the channel across the last couple of videos, was to get rid of Tarkowski and bring in someone like Reece James. Now that was a plan about 3 weeks ago. I was going to bring in Reece James 3 weeks ago, but I decided to delay the decision until game week 28 because I wasn't sure what was going on with his hamstring. I also wasn't sure about whether or not he was going to make most of the matches because Chelsea were still in the Champions League and had a very tough opponent in Borussia Dortmund to face. Chelsea have now also gone through in the Champions League. They managed to pull back a 1-0 deficit in the first leg to a 2-0 win in the second leg. They go through on aggregate. And unfortunately, I do not actually have enough money to get in on Chilwell, who is 5.9 million, or Reece James, even if I wanted to, at 5.8 million, because I only have 5.6 million in the bank to make this play this week. So my tentative plan right now, without seeing the final fixtures of game week 27 being played out, is to bring in Wesley Fofana. So sticking with the Chelsea team, Fofana is only 4.3 million. He is super cheap. He is at home to Everton this week, which I am hoping is a clean sheet, because bringing Fofana in this week is kind of a hedge bet, I suppose you would say, in order to probably take 1 or 2 hits next week. So if I left Tarkowski in here against Chelsea away, I'm basically assuming Tarkowski is only going to get 2 points. Chelsea are probably going to score. If I spend one of my free transfers now and bring in Wesley Fofana and he just keeps a clean sheet, that is 4 points over Tarkowski. That gives me that amount of funds. I've actually gained my hit by making that trade this week, even though I would be bringing in Fofana next week regardless for their double of Aston Villa at home and Liverpool at home. That second game's not amazing, but it is still an okay double, both games at home. Like I said, this is a 4-week play. We are holding Fofana until 31. He then goes away to Wolves and then at home to Brighton in 31, which he may end up on the bench for that week. But if I bring in Fofana this week and he keeps a clean sheet, that will be 4 points over my predicted score for Tarkowski, which means that next week I have already prepaid for a hit that I am lining up to take. We go into game week 28 with 10 men holding on to Haaland, Rashford, McAllister, and Shaw. My captain, probably Kane, maybe Saka. It'll be one of these two. Flip it around later in the week once we have a little bit more thought on the matter. And we've got 1.3 million in the bank. This then rolls through into game week 29, which is, like I've been saying for about since game week 25, I think 29 is the best game week to bench boost, and we have been planning for this bench boost since game week 25. So at the moment, if I just put the single game weekers on the bench, like so, we have 1 free transfer We have 9 starting members doubling. We have Ward doubling on the bench, 3 Arsenal assets, all with single game weeks at home to Leeds. Haaland single game week at home to Liverpool, and Kane single game week away to Everton with no transfers made at this point. In game week 29, this is the extremely high risk game week for Ivan Toney. I do not like his double. Brighton away, Manchester United away, both two teams, both very good defensively. Toney could be on 9 yellows or even suspended by this point, or the FA could have actually banned him from playing any matches. So in game week 29, we may need to spend a transfer on even Ivan Toney. So that is also in the back of my mind here. But let's assume that Toney is still fit, hopefully. What we are likely looking at doing is probably selling Arsenal assets. Now, selling Arsenal to bring in United and potentially one more Brighton player, but I am less assured on bringing in a second Brighton player, simply because if I do bring in that Brighton player this week, I almost certainly will be benching them in game weeks 30 and 31, which is my last 2 game weeks before I end up free hitting and then wildcarding. And so if I do bring in the likes of a Matoma for game week 29, it would be for a -4 hit, and I would only be playing Matoma in this one double, and he will be on the bench for the remainder of, well, for the following weeks until I wildcard him out. So Matoma in game week 29 for a hit is a lot more of a risky play. We will see whether or not that is actually viable, but it is my only route to getting Fernandes in should I want him. So as of right now, bench boosting in 29, let's assume that Toney isn't banned and also isn't suspended. We would likely go Saka to Fernandes, which I am 0.1 million short of, and then I would need to sell the likes of either Zinchenko or Odegaard in order to fund the move, and that would be for a hit. Saka at home to Leeds, or Fernandes away to Newcastle and at home to Brentford plus a -4 will be a decision that we make next week, but let's just assume we do this. And then we would be bringing in Matoma for Odegaard. We will then just chuck my single game weekers on the bench. This would give me the full 10 doubling on the pitch plus Kane, or maybe we just put Haaland in there, I guess. I don't know which way around that goes. Oh no, sorry. Full 11 doubling, 3 single game weekers on the bench. The single game weekers are Haaland, Kane and Zinchenko. Zinchenko home to Leeds, Kane away to Everton, and Haaland at home to Liverpool. Danny Ward, Crystal Palace away, Aston Villa at home, and we will be bench boosting with a -4. Now this looks like a really strong team. Obviously we need to take into account what impact does United not having Casemiro have on Fernandes. Most likely is Fernandes is probably going to be playing central defensive midfielder. That's not great. He is on penalties. Casemiro, United without Casemiro does affect actually just the overall stability of United squad anyway, and so maybe they don't even manage to generate as much attack. Plus the -4 points in order to bring in Matoma, who will just end up being on my bench, is something that we will definitely need to look at way more closely next week. We do not have to make this decision this week, but those are kind of the thoughts that are running through my head at the moment. Now, and this also assumes that Toney survives, right? So Toney hasn't picked up his 10th yellow card. If he's sitting on 9 yellow cards at this point, running into game week 29, so let's assume he picks up 1 yellow in either the last game of 27 or the game in 28, this is almost certainly going to be João Felix. Now, if this is João Felix, I might be able to get away with this being Odegaard. Ooh, just. So I could hold Odegaard, get Fernandes in, take one hit and get João Felix and Fernandes in. That might work too. But let's just go the way we were planning, which is Matoma and Tony's still here. So we roll forward to game week 30. By this point, Ivan Toney is almost certainly suspended. You cannot bank on him being here anymore. He's unlikely to be playing. So the bench would be, like I said, Matoma is probably on the bench here. We probably play Zinchenko. No, against Liverpool. We probably bench Zinchenko actually. Haaland's obviously in for, probably McAllister at a guess. Maybe something like that. And Ivan Toney is almost certainly dead by now. And so we bring in João Felix or someone else for game weeks 30 and 31. Now remember, this is just a 2-week punt. João Felix has Wolves away and Brighton at home. That could work out. João Felix, I've been watching him over the last few weeks. I love his style of football. I think Potter is getting very close to completely unlocking João Felix's abilities. He scored last week, but it was disallowed for offside. So he is actually in and around doing bits. And I think he's going a little bit under the radar. And he would be kind of the ideal player for a 2 to 3 week punt. As I dead end my team, I would love to jump on someone like João Felix. But who knows, it might change in the future. And this is how the team is lining up. We've got Kepa in net against Wolves away, or potentially Danny Ward at home to Bournemouth might be a play this week. We'll have to see. We've got Wesley Fofana away to Wolves. My double up of Newcastle defence is away to Brentford. That is Trippier and Botman. Luke Shaw is at home to Everton. It's a great defensive fixture. Rashford at home to Everton. Maddison is at home to Bournemouth. Fernandes at home to Everton as well, if we do decide to go with the Everton punt in game week 29, depending on the Casemiro's situation. Haaland away to Southampton, which is when everyone else will be scrambling to get Haaland back in. We've just held him until this point, so other people will be making transfers to bring Haaland back in this week. Like I said, Toney is probably a big thing to deal with, so most people will be trying to go Toney up to Haaland and holding on to whoever they bought in, whether it be a Watkins, an Isak, or whoever else that they've chosen to come with this week. Kane at home to Brighton and João Felix away to Wolves. The bench is McAllister and Matoma, both away to Tottenham, and Zinchenko away to Liverpool. I've only used my one free transfer. Game week 31, this is the last week that I actually play with these players. Following game week I'll be free hitting, and game week 33 I'll be wildcarding. I am a little unsure exactly what we will be doing in game week 31, but what I am probably thinking is that we will have Maddison out because he is away to Man City, and we will be bringing in a Man City mid for a 1 week punt. Maybe someone like Foden, maybe a Mahrez. We can't get to Kevin De Bruyne, he's too expensive, but something like this. And as you'll notice, my Brighton players are still on the bench because they're playing Chelsea away. So bringing Matoma in, like I said, for a hit, just to bench him for the remainder of the following game weeks in game week 29, I don't know. I don't know if that is the smartest idea. I mean, the rest of this team looks amazing for game week 31. Obviously, Ward would be back on the bench, but we've got my Chelsea triple up of Felix, Fofana and Kepa are all at home to Brighton. Bit of a tough game because Brighton are doing amazing, and I've got a defensive double up there, so that's potentially not amazing. Maybe we do play Zinchenko over Fofana this week. Might be a better idea. My defensive double up of Newcastle, of Trippier and Botman are away to Aston Villa. That's a good game. Shaw is away to Nottingham Forest with Rashford and Fernandes. My 1 week punt of Man City midfielder, Foden, Mahrez, whoever, is at home to Leicester. So it's a pretty good attacking fixture. Haaland's also at home to Leicester. Kane is at home to Bournemouth. Great fixture for Kane. And João Felix is at home to Brighton, which could be a bit of a tricky fixture for my Chelsea lads. And that will be the end of this team. We'll be free hitting after this and then wildcarding in 33, which I've said a couple of times already. Now, the reason that I wanted to run through all those transfer plans is just to show that these Brighton assets sitting on the bench may be the best strategic team to dump in game week 28, even though they do double next week and it is a good double. You may find that you actually get better luck with a different team that has a better set of fixtures across 28, 29, 30 and 31. So like I said, I'm just planning to 31 and 32. The free hit is almost essential if I sell my Arsenal assets, because Arsenal are at home to Southampton that week. I'm going to need Arsenal assets back. I will be heavy on Chelsea. I will be heavy-ish on Brighton. They will both be blanking. I will be invested in Haaland and one other City mid who is probably blanking 32, and United I would have a triple up who are probably blanking. So like I said, selling Arsenal and bringing in United assets basically locks in your free hit for game week 32. And whether or not you have the wild card left, if you do have the wild card left, I would say the most optimal play, free hit 32, wild card 33, set up for 34 and 37. If you don't have your wild card remaining though, you may be looking at a free hit in 34 or 37 in order to negate all those late wildcarders. It will be quite tricky. I do not exactly know what you would do without your wildcard in these situations here, but yeah, something for you guys to consider indeed. So that's the tentative plans at the moment. So game week 28 is Andreas out, Maddison in, Tarkowski out, who is playing, to bring in Fofana for a 4-week hold, which reads Everton home, double of Villa and Liverpool at home, Wolves away, and then potentially bench in game week 31 at home to Brighton. He is playable against Brighton for sure, but I think I would probably play Zinchenko that game week. So those are all the strategic pitfalls that some managers are looking to make that they may not have considered. The likes of even Tony is probably going to be out, and if you are going heavy on Manchester United, you will probably be locking in your free hit for game week 32, which is probably the best game week to free hit given the current landscape. So that's it for the strategy options. We will go through a game week 27 review. Like I said, there are still some games to be played. I'll just go through a couple of talking points here. I decided to captain McAllister over even Tony. There were a few reasons why I went for McAllister instead of Tony. First of all, McAllister gets an extra point for any goal scored to start with. I also thought it was a pretty good defensive set of 2 games for Brighton, and so I was hoping that Brighton would get 2 clean sheets through this. So I was thinking there was extra 2 points there for clean sheets and an extra point for the goal. Tony is a bit of a yellow card magnet. As we know, he's sitting on 8 yellow cards, and so he is probably going to pick up a yellow card at some point. He's pretty prone to do so, and so captaining a player that's going to get a yellow card maybe not as good. Both of Tony's games were away from home, whereas McAllister had 1 game at home against Crystal Palace in the second fixture. And also, McAllister is a huge differential that a lot of people are sleeping on. He's only owned by 6.5% of the game. Way less managers would have been captaining him this week, and he's actually involved in heaps of the attack, especially since he has moved to that 10 role with Lallana out, which I've also been talking about for the last few game weeks. Now, on McAllister, I actually brought him in after I brought Salah in. So Salah was, like I said, in game week 25, I did not go heavy on Liverpool. And the reason I didn't go heavy on Liverpool was to save my wild card for game week 33. Those players that loaded up on Trent, Darwin, Gakpo in game week 25 almost certainly were going to wildcard in game week 26 or 27, just because of the way the Liverpool fixtures were falling, and there were other doubles that people were going to want to jump onto. I bought Salah in as a bit of a blocking play for game week 25. He got his 11 points. I then sold him immediately for McAllister as part of my three-way switch, who McAllister scored 14 points, was looking super happy last week. Then United went out and got decimated by Liverpool, and Salah scored 21 points. So it looked like I was about down 7 points on that deal. However, that was short-lived, because this week Salah got granted a penalty, sent it very wide. He wasn't even close to shaving the post. He actually set that ball out really wide. Ended up on 0 points. McAllister is currently sitting on 7. I've obviously got him captain, so it's a bit better for me, but last week's points of 14 and this week's points of 7 is a total of 21, which matches Salah's points of 21 last week and 0 this week. Plus McAllister has a game in hand. Plus I was able to captain him this week. And so the short-term bringing in of Salah and then taking him out, even though that immediate hit was pretty painful and completely unexpected, McAllister still looks like he's actually going to work out to be the better play across the consecutive game weeks in which we were lining up these strategic options. So it's always good to go back a few game weeks and have a look at what plays you made and why, and whether those things actually worked out over the long run. The other big decisions that I made this week was to completely avoid the Brentford defence and play my Arsenal and United players instead. Obviously, I've been holding short through these blanks and tricky fixtures in order to be playing him in these game weeks. He did pick up a clean sheet, also got a yellow card though, so only came away with the 5 points. Zinchenko kept his clean sheet. He only played 71 minutes as well, which was kind of interesting. I guess he is being saved for the fixtures coming up, but thankfully he's come away with his clean sheet, because the Brentford assets lost their clean sheet within 35 seconds of the match kicking off. I think was it McNeil? Yeah, I think McNeil scored 35th second of the game, and then all the Raya clean sheets, Pinnock, Henry, all of those all completely wiped out. So the strategy of going quality over quantity is currently ahead, but of course Brentford do have another game. It's against Southampton, who do not score a lot of goals, and so we may end up slightly down on that deal, but most managers, like I said, were either using wildcards to bring in Brentford, or they were taking hits. And so for either of those two plays, if I'm down a couple of points with Zinchenko on 6 compared to like a Henry who might make it through to say 8 points, having held my wild card and not taking the hits, I think I'm definitely ahead on that deal. We also decided to go against Matoma and play Odegaard instead. At the moment, that is like for like. Odegaard is on 7 points, Matoma's on 6, much of the likeness. However, I think a lot of players out there have actually got Odegaard sitting on the bench. There's some very heavy benches out there. Since that Gabriel's sitting on the bench, 14-point monster haul, where they've chosen to play like a Henry or a Pinnock over that. That's a little bit painful. Feel sorry. Don't feel that sorry. I'm actually stoked about that, but it is what it is. And then Kane. Consistent Kane. I mean, Tottenham have not been looking very good at all for a string of games, and yet Harry Kane just continues to deliver. He's not going anywhere from his squad. I am almost certainly holding him to the end of the season. He may disappear on the free hit. I think Tottenham have got a tricky fixture, and they're away to Newcastle, so I might lose Might lose Kane in game week 32, but he will be there on my wild card and seeing out the rest of the season, even though game weeks 31 and 32, 33 and 34 are not amazing for Tottenham. Manchester United at home and Liverpool away. Not great, but Kane will be in there because I want him for those last 4 games of the season. So total points 67, average is 47 at the moment. Game week rank of 685k, and we have gone back from, I was 942k in game week 24. We then decided to play with 10 men and then take some hits, and we are now back in front of my game week 24 score. Thankfully, we've gone up 220,000 places so far this week, with hopefully a bit more to come with my captain to play. And we should be set for a pretty good run into the end of the season. Now, if you did make it this far through the video, which you have because you are listening to this right now, please hit that like button on the video. And if you did like the content and want to be notified about more FPL content coming your way, hit the big red subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified about future releases. And until next time, I'll catch you again shortly. Cheers.